Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's 30 by 30 webinar. Really excited that you're joining us today. A lot of people are just jumping online right now, so we'll give folks a chance to do that. As you're joining us, we thought we'd play a fun little game connected to Biodiversity Day and Biodiversity Week that we're celebrating. And if folks want to jump over into the chat and take a guess at what species we have depicted in the photo on your screen right now, we'll take all answers and then give you the correct answer as we get started here. So welcome again. Really glad you're able to join us for today's Biodiversity Showcase as part of the 30 by 30 webinar series. Really glad you're here. As you're jumping on, please go ahead and jump over to the chat and share any guesses you have on what species we have in front of us. All right. See one guess in there: an alligator, lizard, western fence, blue lizard, blue belly lizard, side blotch, blunt nose, collared, fence lizard. Let's wait for a couple of more responses in here. Blunt nose, lost leopard. I mean, these are all better guesses than I would come up with for sure. I'm looking over to my resident biologist here to make sure I've got the right name for this. And it's a side-blotched lizard. So, did anyone? Yeah, Jeremy, way to go. Is that the only one? Nice. So, Jeremy, I'm sure there'll be some prize showing up in the mail. No, I wish there was a prize showing up in the mail to honor your knowledge of California's amazing biodiversity species. But what a fun way to start today, just thinking about the richness of California's biodiversity, some of the unique species that you have there, the flora, the fauna, really exceptional. So welcome again. If I haven't met you yet, my name is Sean Johnson at the University of Montana, but I've had the privilege of being a part of the support team that's supporting the 30 by 30 partnership effort throughout the state as you've moved from really creating these really compelling pathways towards 30 by 30 to working together to implement them this year and beyond. Had a number of exciting webinars this year. This one I think is shaping up to be one of the best yet, as we're going to be surveying a whole bunch of different activities across the state, looking at different perspectives, insights, landscapes, stories, and people who are really driving us towards that 30 by 30 goal. Want to just quickly go over the agenda for today, and looking at a pretty simple lineup, but a lot is happening within the whole agenda today. So we've got some really great remarks from Deputy Secretary Jennifer Norris, who's really going to showcase the conversation around why we're doing this work. And biodiversity does matter. It matters for a whole bunch of reasons. Sometimes we don't really stop to think about those. And so this is a chance to just pause, reflect, think about how incredible biodiversity is and what it brings to our lives, our livelihoods, and our shared collective future as the state of California and beyond. Then we've got a whole bunch of highlight stories from across the state, really thinking about as we take individual insight and motivation and passion and put that into action, what does that look like? What is that achieving? And how can we learn from and celebrate each other and the success that we're having as we work to conserve biodiversity across the state? So we've got a lineup of 6 folks here, and the names are on the screen, and they'll have a chance to introduce themselves here in just a little bit. And then we want to conclude with just a bit of information about where do we go from here, what's next, how to stay involved, engaged. A lot of you show up to these because you're learning. A lot of you are contributing to really impressive outcomes within your own communities and landscapes. And so we want to continue to discuss ways to learn from you, learn with you, and continue to connect and engage so that we're continuing to build momentum and build a bit of a movement as we work towards the 30 by 30 goal statewide. So with that, I want to get out of the way and get into the program because we've got a lot here to cover, and go ahead and invite Deputy Secretary Jennifer Norris to the screen. And Jen, I'm just going to turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Sean. And thank you everyone for being here. I love these webinars. It's always good to connect. And soon we're going to connect in person, but we'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, so I'm going to talk about why biodiversity matters. This week we're celebrating biodiversity, which of course, as you all know, it's biodiversity is something I love. And biodiversity is really everything from algae to zebras, DNA to deserts. It's the whole web of life on Earth, things we can see, lots of things we can't see, and species we have yet to identify. And it's important for a whole lot of reasons. Oh, sorry, that was my cool biodiversity slide. Sorry about that. Those are all some cool things. Note the fungi and the beetles. Don't forget about the little things in life. Allison's going to tell us more about that. So one of the important reasons is actually climate change. Natural and working lands sequester about 700 million metric tons of carbon a year, which is the equivalent to about 12% of the United States annual greenhouse gas emissions. So natural and working lands are a key tool in the toolbox in the fight against climate change. And we're not just talking about the trees above ground. We're talking about things that are underground, dead biomass in the soil, woody debris, leaf litter, all the things that are part of functioning ecosystems are part of what allow us to store all this carbon. Natural and working lands also protect us from threats associated with climate change. Wetlands buffer our communities from sea level rise. Urban trees protect us from extreme heat. Healthy forests reduce the risk of flooding and soil erosion. So natural systems are really key to helping us adapt as the climate changes. Nature is also essential for our well-being. Research shows that people who visit outdoor spaces for 30 minutes or more a week have lower rates of depression and high blood pressure. Time in nature brings us peace. Nature brings us joy. And there's a reason we go to green growing places, and it's the biodiversity, I think, that speaks to us. And for some of us, biodiversity matters because it's just an endless source of wonder and mystery. These are ocotillo, which are one of my favorite desert plants, which most of the time look like dead sticks. But this is what they looked like 2 days after Hurricane Hilary came through. These plants just pushed out these little green shoots to take advantage of the rain and to grow and thrive. And where were you on May 3rd of this year when hundreds of millions of birds were flying overhead, coming back from their winter grounds to find a place on Earth, a little patch of trees that maybe is where they were the year before? It's just incredible to me, biodiversity and what it's capable of. But the most existential reason biodiversity matters is actually the one we almost barely understand. So this is Earth, our planet. And as far as we know, it's the only one that sustains life. And most of this Earth is just rock and magma. The biosphere where we live is just this little thin, several-mile membrane that is wrapping around it. And that biosphere is created and sustained by a suite of cycles: the water cycle, the nitrogen cycle, the carbon cycle. And those cycles, those are our life support systems, and they're built on the plants and animals and protists and fungi that inhabit this Earth. Life is a self-reinforcing system on our planet. Photosynthetic organisms, they harness energy from the sun, creating sugar and oxygen, which then support Krebs cycle dependent organisms like us. We can't make energy from the sun, and we can't manufacture oxygen at the scale we need to keep us all alive. We need plants. And plants need decomposers to break down dead things, to free up nutrients. Trees reproduce because of bees and wasps, and their seeds are carried by birds and rodents and mammals. The conditions that make life possible on this planet rely on the biodiversity of it. They're inextricably linked. Ecologists know that the biodiversity crisis is as existential as the climate crisis. It is indisputable that we as a species cannot live without the other species of our planet. And yet we are destroying biodiversity at a rate that is 1,000 times the background rate. And each species lost is like losing another block out of a giant Jenga tower. And we don't know which one is going to take the whole thing down. Some of you might know about this Biosphere 2 in the Arizona desert. I find this a fascinating scientific endeavor. This was envisioned as a closed, self-sustaining Earth as a sort of test case for when we destroy this planet and we need to move to Mars. They built over 3 acres, an ocean, savanna. They brought in a rainforest. They had pollinators and plants and fungi. And they brought 8 people in. And the idea was they were going to put them in a closed system, not bring anything in or out for 2 years. And in the end, they had to free them early because this system could not produce enough food, clean water, or oxygen to keep them alive. Now, this was kind of considered maybe a failure, but to me, it really demonstrates that we need to work harder to keep what we have than to try to recreate this mysterious, complex world we call home. 30 by 30 is the increasingly mainstream understanding that we need to protect nature to save ourselves. And thanks to all of you, California is leading the 30 by 30 charge. And then, as you know, last year in December, 190 countries came together and committed to protect 30% of the planet as well, which is really exciting because we need the whole world to pitch in. Today, we're going to hear from several amazing people doing incredible work to protect California's biodiversity. And we really hope it will inspire you to keep up the hard and necessary work you're doing to protect our nature. We really thank you for being part of this partnership and for all you do to protect biodiversity because it really, really matters. So thanks. Sean, back to you.
Thanks, Jen. That was amazing and grounding and really gave us a broad brush view of why this is so important, why it matters, why the work that each of the people who are on the screen today are important in this broader picture of things. And yeah, that picture of the Arizona 3-acre self-contained failure was both a chance to reflect on what we have, but also the mystery of what we have and the magic of what we're trying to sustain. So really poignant, especially as we're thinking about this as a celebration and an opportunity. And I think celebration and opportunity are 2 of the words that come to mind when I think about the folks that we have joining us next. So I'd love to have our 6 panelists just turn your cameras on for just a moment and say hello. We have Allison Young from the Center for Biodiversity and Community Science, Alina Bhakti from LA County Parks, Colin Barrows from the Cactus to Clouds Institute, Tiana Williams from the York Tribe Wildlife Division, Mark Henley from California Wildfowl, and Michelle Halber from Pepperwood Preserve. And we've invited each of them today to take us to their places and the work that they're doing, both with a short video that you'll see at the beginning of each of their presentations and some follow-up remarks where they're really telling the story of their work and why it matters in the broader context of our shared work at the state level, across the country, and across the globe. And just couldn't think of a better way for us to honor and celebrate, as well as build momentum forward as we really lean into conserving biodiversity for all the reasons that Jen just shared. So thanks, panelists. Great to see you all. Looking forward to hearing more from you momentarily. Allison, if you want to stay on the screen, you're welcome to. We're going to go ahead and move right into this. And I think, Devin, if you want to go ahead and play Allison's short video, we'll just jump right in.
Behind me, I can hear some sea lions. Hey there. So I'm here in the tide pools at Palmer's Point, which is in Sumeg State Park, up in Trinidad, Humboldt County. Love listening to the waves crashing behind me. I can hear some sea lions barking way out on those rocks out there. There's some other people who've come down from the campground who are tide pooling as well. Just a really lovely, beautiful spot and a beautiful morning. I'm Allison Young, and together with Dr. Rebecca Johnson, I co-direct the Center for Biodiversity and Community Science at the California Academy of Sciences. I'm also a marine biologist, and so is Rebecca. So when we were starting our community science program, we knew we wanted to have a project in the tide pools where we got to work with volunteers, because it's one of the best places to connect to marine biodiversity along the California coast. So the work that we do with volunteers is documenting species, documenting biodiversity, so we can understand change through time, how species ranges are changing along the California coast, and to overall just understand the effects of climate change on our species along the coast. We work with volunteers to document species using iNaturalist, so taking photos of organisms that we find in the tide pools. When we started our program, we were working at Pillar Point, which is near Half Moon Bay along the San Mateo coast. But since then, we've expanded our work through a program called Snapshot Cal Coast, where we work with partners from San Diego all the way up to Del Norte. And for 2 weeks every summer, we all work to get our local communities out to the tide pools, out to the coast, to document the biodiversity that we can find there and basically create a snapshot of coastal biodiversity every summer. There are so many things that I really love about this work. I love tide pools and tide pooling so much that I not only do it for work, I also do it for fun when I have a chance to go out in my spare time. You know, tide pools are a really accessible way to connect to the ocean and the species that live in the marine environment. You only need to have a pair of rubber boots or willing to get your feet wet, and almost everyone can go out to the tide pools and see the incredible biodiversity out there. The tide pools are so biodiverse. You can see basically all the major phyla in the tide pools if you look really carefully. Our volunteers especially love to find nudibranchs, which are really colorful sea slugs, and there's lots of different ones of them along the California coast. But it's always a good day in the tide pools when we find an octopus as well. Another thing I really love is how different tide pool sites can be from one another. So you can visit one day and go to a different site the next day, and it will feel totally different. And so all this together makes me excited every time I go tide pooling that I might see something I've never seen before. And that's a really fun feeling to have every time you go out to the tide pools. So I recommend to check your tide charts, see if you can go visit your local tide pools, and while you're out there, take some pictures and upload them to iNaturalist. Great. I'm just going to pull up my slides. There we go. Yeah. All right. Can everyone see those? Yeah? Yeah. Great. Yeah, so thanks so much. I'm going to expand a little bit more about the community science work that we do at the Cal Academy along the California coast. And basically, the work that we do is focused on documenting biodiversity. So understanding what species are at particular sites over time, and then using that information to understand how species ranges are changing along the California coast. And the really fun thing is that we do this all with volunteers. Anyone who wants to can come out to the tide pools with us and help us document biodiversity. And we make it accessible by asking people to document species using iNaturalist. So people only need to take photos of what they're finding. They don't actually have to know how to ID everything. So what does field work in the tide pools look like? Well, that photo on the left there is some of our team. That's Dr. Rebecca Johnson and Natalie and Olivia, who are on our team. And you can see that while we're out there, we're climbing on rocks, really slippery rocks. We're walking over really slippery rocks. Sometimes we're actually walking like deep in pools looking for species. And so we are always out there wearing our rubber boots to help us like navigate this terrain. And we always tell our volunteers, you know, rubber boots, or at least shoes with good tread, that you don't mind getting wet out in the tide pools. We can only go out when it's low tide, so we never really have a set like field time. We have to check the tide charts based on where we want to go, and then figure out when we can actually get out there. To show you kind of what this looks like, this is Pillar Point at a high tide. So pay attention to those rocks that you can kind of see in the middle of the screen there. And this is what Pillar Point looks like on a good negative low tide, really exposing the full rocky reef out there. So we're always looking for good low tides to go out. So the timing of our good low tides changes throughout the year. So sometimes we're out at sunrise, like arriving at a site between 4 or 5 in the morning and tide pooling as the sun comes up. Other times of the year, we might be out at sunset, tide pooling as the sun goes down, which leads us into night tide pooling, which is really fun because over the past few years, we've been bringing UV lights out to the tide pools to see which organisms fluoresce, kind of as a fun side project. We've learned a lot through that. But no matter when we're out in the tide pools, we and our volunteers are trying to document all the species that we could find, all the seaweeds, all the animals. And like I said in the video, almost all major groups of animals, at least, can be found in the tide pools. But finding some of them takes a little bit more like careful looking and exploring to actually discover them out there. When we started our program at Pillar Point over 10 years ago, there wasn't even like a publicly available species list for Pillar Point. And now you can see we have over 36,000 observations of over 800 species out there. We have not just a species list, but actually like a species atlas of Pillar Point. We've seen a lot of changes in the 10 plus years that we've been working there with our volunteers. Like we saw sea star wasting disease when it hit, the warm water blob and the El Nino that was happening in like 2015, 2016 that brought a bunch of southern species northward into our tide pools as well. And seeing all those changes at Pillar Point really like pushed us to scale our community science program. Like we could see it was happening at Pillar Point, but we wanted to have a better picture of what was happening along the whole California coast. So we started this program called Snapshot Cal Coast. It's 2 to 3 weeks every summer. And we work with partners from San Diego to Del Norte. And they work to get their local communities out to their local tide pools and other coastal spots to document biodiversity using iNaturalist. So we do this all together and we build a snapshot of coastal biodiversity of the California coast every summer. In the 8 years that we've held Snapshot Cal Coast, over 26,000 people have made over 450,000 observations of almost 9,000 species. And more recently, we've started adding on the Solstice Sea Star Search in June and December to get folks out specifically looking for starfish. We're looking particularly at those that were hit by sea star wasting disease. Some have recovered pretty well, like these ochre stars right here in this photo. But other species like sunflower stars, which are like so integral to the health of our northern kelp forests, haven't really recovered. And there's only been a few sightings of them over the last few years. And there's a couple other species that haven't really recovered from sea star wasting disease. So by asking people to go out and look for starfish and document all the starfish that they can find, it's fun, but we're also hoping that we might get more information about where these particular species might still be along the coast. So what are we doing with all this data? Well, we're partnering with the California Ocean Protection Council to turn this data into action. OPC saw that we were collecting all this biodiversity data with California residents and visitors, and they asked us how we could work together to help give them actionable insights into proactively managing the coast. So we're building what we're calling an early warning and forecasting system to help see how species ranges will likely change into the future, like southern species moving northward, like this sunburst anemone right here that's been slowly making its way up the coast with warmer waters. And then using all that species information, we can actually also see sites where it seems like a lot of change will be happening. And the cool thing is that we can feed all of this back into Snapshot Cal Coast. We can ask participants to go to particular places and look for particular species to help us get a better understanding of what's happening along our coast and make better decisions going forward for the species along the California coast. So if you have the chance, I recommend, get out to the coast, check those tide charts, go marvel at the amazing biodiversity of our tide pools. And while you're out there, take some photos and upload them to iNaturalist. Thanks.
Wow,
I just
Allison,
want to
that
say
was
something, Sean.
incredible. Oh, go ahead,
I'm gonna
Jen.
have a hard time after each speaker. I'm gonna have to do it, but this makes me so happy. Thank you for the video, Allison. That was awesome. Okay, I'm gonna go back off camera.
Yeah, I think that was just exactly what we were looking for, and such an exciting snapshot of your work, the importance of it, how it connects to the celebration that we're having this week and tomorrow with Biodiversity Day, but also how you're empowering others to carry it forward and contribute across the state. So thanks so much. If people have questions, and I see there are some questions coming forward, we're going to try to make some time at the end of the presentations across all of the panelists to bring some of those forward. And so please go ahead and put those into the chat or the Q&A, and we'll be observing those throughout. But in order to get through even more great content, I'm going to go ahead and just keep moving us forward. And I would invite, as people are sharing their opening remarks, if you want to share anything about yourself, your personal bio, we did just give a quick introduction to you and your name, but you're welcome to do that as well. So Devin, I think we want to transition to our next video now. And if we could bring up the LA County Parks video, we'll share that. And then we'll invite Alina on to provide some follow-up remarks. So let's go to the next video. That was wonderful, Alina. Really impressive work.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you.
I'll turn the floor over to you now if you'd like to jump in.
Sounds good. So good morning, everyone. My name is Alina Bokde, and I'm the Chief Deputy Director for the County of Los Angeles, Department of Parks and Recreation. And can you bring up the PowerPoint? Great, thank you. So I hope you enjoyed the video. The video is work that we are currently doing to transform the second largest landfill in the country into the first regional park in the county within 40 years. So I want to today spend the few minutes that I have talking about the Park Needs Assessment Plus and how projects like our future Puente Hills Regional Park is a critical part of a 30 by 30 framework. So next slide. So again, really excited to be here to share biodiversity and celebrate Biodiversity Week. Go ahead and jump to the next slide. So we were very excited because our 30 by 30 framework, which we call our Park Needs Assessment Plus, was adopted by the Board of Supervisors on December the 6th, 2022. So kind of in the last 8 months, we've been celebrating that adoption, which again, really aligns with national, state, and global efforts to fight both climate change and protect biodiversity. And so I'm excited to share with you kind of the county's 30 by 30 plan. Next slide. So as we jump into some of the key outcomes for the Park Needs Assessment Plus, one of the key focuses that we looked at was to ensure that our most vulnerable residents living in park poor, tree poor communities across Los Angeles County have access to parks, open space, and the biodiversity that these resources support. So we are very committed to making sure that equitable access and access for all is one of the fundamental drivers to our 30 by 30 framework. So you're going to be seeing a lot of outcomes of data. So in looking at defining vulnerable populations, the areas that we identified in the maps that we're sharing with you come from the Healthy Places, data from the Healthy Places Index. And we really looked at 4 key criteria. So we looked at social barriers like poverty and unemployment, transportation barriers like limited access to public transit and automobile. We also looked at health vulnerability, so reduced life expectancy at birth, and environmental vulnerability. So for example, areas where there's a high number of excessive heat days and limited tree canopy or lack of shade equity. So many of the vulnerable areas identified in the Park Needs Assessment Plus are also, if you're familiar with our Park Needs Assessment that was adopted in 2016, are also correlate with our very high and high park need areas within the county. But the Park Needs Assessment also looked at areas within rural communities such as the Antelope Valley and Santa Clarita Valley as areas with high population vulnerability. So next slide. So this was our 30 by 30 strategy for P&A Plus is, again, a commitment to conserve at least 30% of lands and waters by 2030. And so our P&A Plus identified the areas that were have the most both environmental benefits within the county, but also the areas with the most environmental burdens, and based on various indicators. So next slide. So the framework, and this is really the framework for our P&A Plus, which goes beyond kind of both state and federal 30 by 30 initiatives and what we call the traditional conservation efforts. While we absolutely, as you can see on the map on the left, these are key areas for conservation. We also are prioritizing restoration of degraded lands as really a critical matter of environmental justice in Los Angeles County, where many communities that are underserved are plagued with these environmental burdens. And so our P&A Plus focuses on priority areas for conservation as well as priority areas for restoration. And so the restoration areas are the areas where there are the most environmental burdens in terms of groundwater threat, hazardous waste, poor air quality, pollution burdens. And these priority restoration areas do require additional investments to, again, transform these areas like we're doing with the Puente Hills Future Regional Park. So our strategy in the P&A Plus reimagines conservation with both the traditional efforts of acquisition and protection of natural lands, as well as the restoration of degraded lands. And some examples are brownfields, along with landfills and oil fields, which many of them are located, again, in low-income communities of color, where we have the highest vulnerable population and environmental burdens. So you may not know, but the state of California has 90,000 brownfield sites throughout the state, and over a third of these are located within the county of Los Angeles. So again, these brownfield sites are again an important element and key determinant of conservation work in California. And if we can transform these degraded lands into parks or open space areas, will absolutely, these sites will support and promote biodiversity and make sure that biodiversity is supported throughout the entire state. That includes urban communities that have been significantly impacted by, again, the degradation of land and air and water. Next slide. So Los Angeles County is a biodiversity hotspot, and we looked, part of our work at the PNA Plus was again to really lift up some of this data. We have over 4,000 species of plants and animals, and as one of the most populous county in the nation, LA County does offer a unique environment where more than 10 million people coexist with wildlife. So our PNA Plus identified both the areas for conservation and restoration based on the analysis of where the environmental benefits and burdens are concentrated. We looked at species diversity, location of significant habitats, and habitat connectivity. Some of the data sets that we used included the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, the California Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, and the U.S. Geological Survey. So the PNA Plus supports and meets biodiversity goals by promoting, again, conservation of additional lands and restoration of degraded lands across the county. So next slide. So I just want to show you that the future Puente Hills Regional Park is part of the Puente Chino Hills Wildlife Corridor, where it has more than 100 animal species. And you saw a few photos there of deer, coyotes, foxes, hawks, owls, raccoons, gray squirrels, doves, butterflies. Next slide. And the vegetation is the sycamores, oats, walnut woodlands, coastal sage scrub, and the grasses that all contribute, again, to the beauty of an open space area for not only for humans, but also for many animal species. And next slide. So as I've stated in the presentation, we looked at the data again of where most of the degraded kind of the brownfield sites are located, and 84% of the population that are people of color live within the priority areas of restoration that are identified as part of the PNA Plus. And so again, restoration of brownfield lands is an environmental justice issue. And the PNA Plus provides a pathway for identifying ways to be able to, again, both conserve the important habitat, open space land, but also address and develop strategies to remediate and restore our important degraded lands of brownfields. And then our last slide. So we have some next steps that, as with the adoption of the PNA Plus, we are now moving into implementation of the PNA Plus framework. In the chat, I think somewhere in the chat, we are sharing both the PNA Plus document if you want to familiarize yourself or learn more about the PNA Plus. And we also have a website for the PNA Plus where you can have access and download all of the data that was developed as part of the PNA Plus to be able to support your work in both conserving our lands throughout the state of California. So again, thank you for the opportunity to share some of the work we're doing here at the County of Los Angeles Parks and Recreation.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Alina. And just so you know, Devin wasn't able to share his screen and drop links at the same time. So those links are coming into the chat here momentarily, and amazing resources, beautiful maps, in-depth analysis that's really leading towards inspiring action. So really great things. And love Cassie's comment here in the slide too. The analysis, the detail is really facilitating not just really robust conversations, but really amazing activities on the ground. Jen, I saw you pop up too. Did you want to share a thought?
I know I can't do this after every person, but I want to. I mean, LA County Parks is just leading the world in 30 by 30 imagining in an urban place. And so I just want to thank you, Alina, for being here. And I'm just inspired, but I don't want to take up too much time because we have lots more speakers to go. I'll be quiet.
Speaking of amazing and inspiring speakers, Colin, can I invite you forward?
Oh, geez, I don't think I can live up to
There
that. Well, thank you for having me, everybody, and I'm really happy to be able to share a little bit of the desert with you. Before my video starts, I just want to introduce myself. My name is Colin Barrows with Cactus Cloud Institute, also the Environmental Programs Coordinator at the University of California, Riverside Palm Desert Center. And I really enjoyed I just want to say I've really enjoyed the talk so far, especially the call out to iNaturalist. I was going to share as part of my bio that, you know, iNaturalist, there are few better tools for exploring the biodiversity of anywhere you're going, but especially California. iNaturalist is like grown in California, and there's there's a great community of identifiers and observations. I've personally made 42,000 observations on iNaturalist within the state of California, and 155,000 identifications for others. So, you know, I definitely feel like it's a great, important tool and really transformational for our understanding of biodiversity. So today, I'd like to take you on a little tour of some of the work that I'm working on through Cactus Cloud Institute and the Protect California Deserts Coalition of many organizations from across the state and nationwide, to establish a new national monument out here in the desert called the Chuckwalla National Monument. And I just want to sort of give you a little preview of what's to come here, where one of the great ways to explore this really vast landscape is in a small airplane that we do through an organization or go through an organization called EcoFlight. And so we're going to get kind of an aerial tour of the proposed Chuckwalla National Monument and then zoom in on some of the highlights of the biodiversity that's found out here. And you can go ahead and press play.
Yo sé que te gusta. Sol, 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 sol. Yo sé que te gusta. Sol, 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 sol. Yo sé que te gusta.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and share a few slides as well here. I'm sure someone will let me know if something's not working well. So as I mentioned, not only part of the Cactus Cloud Institute, but we're a member of the Protect California Deserts Coalition, working on this Chuckwalla National Monument project. And probably if anybody is familiar with this area part of the desert, if you've been here before, you've been to a place called Painted Canyon, Ladder Canyon, gone for a hike there. You've certainly heard about the Salton Sea, which we can see here in the distance. One of the things that if you talk to anybody who's like a desert advocate or a fan of the desert for more than 30 seconds, you're going to hear about how great the desert is and how full of life it is, and how, the sort of dictionary definition of a desert that's this desolate wasteland is wrong, and it's really this amazing biodiversity hotspot. So I'm going to do the same and try and really impress on you folks if you have never had a chance to visit, and I hope that you do, but if you haven't, just what an amazing place the desert is, and not empty at all. I think importantly, also not just the sort of biodiversity part of it, but it's also about sort of our relationship as people, as a community, our relationship to biodiversity and these public lands. So this is actually one of the first memories I have is of exploring Painted Canyon. Here's a picture of one of these slot canyons in Painted Canyon, of going out and sort of discovering nature and getting outdoors. So it's a really important place to me. I was actually on a field trip for like an eco club or environmental club in middle school, and we went on hikes, throughout the area. And this was the first one we did, and it really stood out to me, I think, in my memory. It's this, tight little slot canyons that you're hiking through, and they have these ladders that you can climb all over the place. It really made an impression on me at a young age. And my parents were already in the environmental and conservation field, so probably would have ended up there anyway, but this definitely stood out to me. And then later on, after going to school, I met my wife, and we both were involved in this. And during the pandemic, we really found this place to be kind of like our escape, because you could go and explore and be active outdoors, and not have to worry about being around other people. And so I'm sharing this little GIF of her. We were exploring this little side canyon. You can see she probably doesn't like to be described this way, but she's a little bit afraid of heights. And so I was really happy to see her be brave and come down this little slot canyon as we were exploring out there. So again, it's just a really important place to me personally, as well as to the community out here, not just for the plants and animals, but to the people too, right? And I also kind of want to share some of the thinking about those relationships with people, share some of like the bright spots that the work that we're doing in addition to the Chuckwalla National Monument proposal. So my wife and I she works at another nonprofit organization called COFEM, based in the Coachella Valley. And together we partner on this program called Nuestro Desierto, which is actually funded by a grant from CNRA and California State Parks. So thank you. To get youth from our community outdoors, exploring the desert. They get a California Naturalist certification, college credit. We provide food and transportation and all of those, everything that basically you would need to go on these trips and to learn more about our desert and have this relationship with the desert for free, thanks to this big grant. So here they are in the Whitewater Preserve. This is last year's class. It's really fun because of the additional funding. It's really fun that we get to explore outside of the desert and see the connections between the desert and other places. So this is from our field trip to the Channel Islands last year. We're just about getting ready to go to Yosemite in about a week with this year's class. Here's this year's class in UC Deep Canyon Reserve. And this is the kind of experience that we're really trying to get. I wish there was a video with sound that we could see, but this is again at the Deep Canyon Reserve. And were at this pool, what they called their fire suppression pond there. It's kind of a joke. But what we were doing and what folks are listening to are the bats and the nighthawks that were flying overhead. And, you know, just getting to be in the desert at night and around the sunset is this kind of transformational experience. And you could really feel it in the moment that the students were getting exposed to this part of their community that they might normally never get to. Okay, so I'm gonna jump into the National Monument and just really kind of go through some of the stuff we saw in the video, the smoke trees, the Mecca aster, which is an endemic species found nowhere else except for the proposal area. These California fan palms, these oases in the desert. There's actually a little spring right behind me where I took this photo. These dry wash woodlands are really important habitat for birds, migratory birds, for the bighorn sheep, mountain lions, burrow deer, the animals that are living out there. This is another endemic plant only found in the proposal area, the Orcopia sage. Here's our bighorn sheep. Again, this is a little spring in the Orcopia Mountains. This is one of my favorite spots at the Chuckwalla Dune Thicket in the proposal. Sunrise at the Chuckwalla Dune Thicket. There's a fringe-toed lizard that lives there. It's the southern extent of their range. There's some cool discoveries waiting to be found. This is the first time this particular type of cactus was found in the state of California. This is Corn Spring. This is a really important cultural site as well as a wildlife area and biodiversity area. Ironwood trees growing in the wash, in these dry wash woodlands. Here's the ironwood tree blooming. They're just spectacular in about May, June, July when they're blooming all at once out here in the desert. Right when it's nice and hot. This is the Munsis cholla, these almost like Joshua tree sized cactus out in the desert. Recreation opportunities and more plants. Here's a quick map showing the area. You can see the existing conservation areas, existing protected areas. We have Joshua Tree National Park, Sand to Snow National Monument, and the Santa Rosa and San Jacinto Mountains National Monument. And what you can see in the community here is we're very fortunate to be sort of surrounded by these protected areas, except for in the eastern Coachella Valley, which also tends to be the folks who have less access. So, you know, not just for biodiversity, but for equity, what we want to do with the Chuckwalla National Monument is plug that gap and have the area surrounded by not just biodiversity, but access to nature, recreation, those wonderful things. Here's another view of the map. We're talking about approximately 700,000 acres, including a lot of the stuff we've been talking about. We can take questions about renewable energy later. Again, some of the wonderful wildlife, some of the amazing wildflowers that are found here. Besides biodiversity, again, equitable access, carbon storage, clean air and water, and the economic benefits of desert conservation. So if you're interested in learning more, I'll be putting some links in the chat. You can contact me at colin@cactuscloud.org. Follow us. And thank you for your time. This is my favorite little Chuckwalla here, saying hello and thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Colin. What a fun tour of the desert. Great personal story and narrative. And sounds like you've got some fans out there too who know you as a great storyteller and naturalist. So if people get a chance to go out to the desert and spend some time with Colin, it sounds like time well spent. And it sounds like it might be fun to hang out with Terry too, who was dancing along to the video as the webinar was playing. So wonderful. And just in the interest of time, want to continue moving forward. I think we have Tiana up next. So want to go ahead and play Tiana's video, Devin, and then we'll jump in.
Ayekwe, Neknau Tiana Williams-Clausen, and I'm the director of the Yurok Tribe Wildlife Department. I'm a Yurok tribal member. I come from the village of Weshkwal. I started with the Yurok Tribe Wildlife Department with its very inception, which began with reintroduction of California condor as our flagship species. Our relationship with condor goes all the way back to the beginning of time. before humans were really even the people of the world, when the animals or the spirits of the world were the ones who were helping manage and caretake it. Ultimately, it was decided by the Tribal Park Task Force, which was a panel of our elders specifically tasked with identifying cultural and ecological restoration needs, who decided that Preganish was the single most important land-based animal to bring back to Yurok ancestral territory. And that has a lot to do with his great cultural importance to us as a tribe. The actual condor restoration project didn't get its start until 2008, when we received funding from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service through a tribal wildlife grant to assess the feasibility of bringing condor home. I talk a lot about our traditional role in managing our landscape and our people for health and wellness, but of course, that's looking at a point in time as well. And from a restoration perspective, or from a world renewal and balance perspective, of course, we don't exist at one moment in time. Everything that we do is based off of our elders' hopes and dreams, which is based off of our ancestors, which is based off of our story since the beginning of time. And so I, as well as a young woman when I started this, was very honored to be a part of bringing the dreams of my elders to fruition. I'm now significantly older. I have more gray hair. I also have a 3-year-old daughter. She's going to grow up having condors in her sky for her entire life. She's not even going to know what it is to miss condors. She will always live in relationship with condors, which is really what this whole program is all about: bringing condor home, back into our communities, back into our conversations, back into our households and into the minds and hearts of our children on behalf of the hearts of our elders.
Amazing, Tiana. I'm going to go ahead and just turn the floor over to you and hear a little bit more about your story.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for that. We will go through the transition of trying to see if this is going to work. Share screen. Okay. And okay, are you guys seeing the correct screen? I'm hoping so. If not, let me know. But so that video was actually taken.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I think you just want to go to presentation mode. If you go to file, and then you'll be able to do start from the beginning. Top left corner.
This is my beginning. Are you guys not seeing the full screen then?
We're not seeing the full screen right now. No.
Gosh darn it! It worked before.
Just go up to file on your PowerPoint window.
Okay.
Yep, click that.
And
actually,
down to...
I'm sorry. Actually, you can go back. The home.
Yeah, Tiana, do you want us to run it from here?
Oh my gosh!
No,
no, because I made some last minute changes. Oh no!
No, it'll be totally fine. Click slideshow. I'm sorry to turn you around. Click slideshow near the top there, next to animations, and then go from the beginning. Slideshow. Yep, from the beginning.
So.
Yeah, you know, Tiana, it looks like it's not showing up properly on our end. We'll go ahead and play it from here, and just let us know when you'd like to advance the slides.
I could also, let me get out of presenter view. That might be
yeah, try that.
So let's try that again. Let me unshare. Sorry guys for holding up here. I swear this worked last time we did it.
No problem.
Okay. Does that look right to you guys?
Yes, it does. That's great.
Woot! Success.
Great.
Okay.
Thanks.
All of that said, I apologize for that little glitch there. But just to reintroduce myself, I'm Tiana Williams from the Yurok tribe. And I'm happy to share today a story of what I would consider to be a biodiversity success story, which is the recovery of Yurok, of California condor Preganish to Yurok country. And so as mentioned in the video, this dream was made by our Tribal Park Task Force all the way back in 2003. And that video was made actually the year after we got our final federal approval to move forward. So that was a couple of years ago now in 2021. And releases were successfully implemented in 2022. So if you think of the time scale there from 2003 to 2022, it actually took us 19 years from the beginning of this dream to actually making it come true. And in fact, we are the first new release area in 19 years since Pinnacles National Park was established as a California Condor Recovery Program member in 2003. So we were doing a lot of work during that time period. One of the big things that we wanted to make sure was that we knew that we wanted to bring condors home for their benefit and for our benefit as to fit into our ecological niche and heal some cultural wounds. We also wanted to make sure that we were doing it on behalf of condors, that this was the right choice for them because they had been driven extinct around 1892 in our region. And so we focused a lot with that initial funding that we got from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on a feasibility analysis that looked at habitat assessments, that looked at contaminants of concern, one of them being DDT, which still causes eggshell thinning in condors. Despite it being banned in the 1970s, thankfully our levels seem very low. And in particular, looking at the potential for impacts from the use of lead ammunition. If there are those of you out there who don't know, the unintentional mortality causes 50% of the mortality in free-flying California condors. And what is happening here, you can see this picture, this radiograph of a deer who's been harvested with lead ammunition. It fragments heavily on impact. It can get into a gut pile, which a hunter will leave behind. And if he's not aware of the impact of the use of lead and that it fragments so heavily, can accidentally leave lead contamination in the environment. Knowing that this was such a problem for condors, we not only assessed that in our local extant turkey vultures, but started our Hunters as Stewards project, which was designed to really reach out to the strong conservation ethic within our local hunting community to let them know about this issue and invite them in as partners to transition to copper, mostly copper, non-lead ammunition that does not have that mortality impact. And we had resounding success with the individuals that we talked to. But I really like to highlight that because A, it is the #1 cause of mortality for condors in the wild, but B, it really emphasizes the need for a partnership-based approach when it comes to conservation and restoration of these critical species like condor, where hunters are the solution as opposed to, a problem to be overcome. And so that partnership-based approach has been our approach the entire way through. You can see this image of our ancestral territories in far northern California. The thin orange line is our reservation, and the red line that's kind of more a polygon is our ancestral territory. Reservation's only 10% of our ancestral territory, but we never ceded our traditional obligation to holistically manage and keep in balance the whole of ancestral territory. And so very early on in 2007, we actually approached Redwood National and State Parks, our local partners with a lot of overlap in ancestral territory, bringing our dream to them and asking them to partner, an invitation which was very enthusiastically accepted and which has ultimately resulted in the Northern California Condor Restoration Program, which is a partnership between us. Ultimately, I would say it is these partnerships that have been the basis of our success. Not only with the National Park Service and California State Parks, but of course with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, who not only gave us that initial funding, but also has been with us every step of the way to implementation. I also want to give a particular shout out to Ventana Wildlife Society, who has been a friend from day one. And as the manager of the California Condor Flock on the coast in Central California. And between the 5 of us, we actually signed a memorandum of understanding in 2014, which kind of jump-started actually getting this rolling. That soon expanded to a partnership agreement that included 16 partners. And because of our approach of coming to people with the idea, learning about their concerns, trying to figure out how we move forward in a good way. Some of our earliest signatories were actually our industries, our utility companies. Green Diamond Resource Company was one of the biggest timber companies around here, because they could see not only that bringing condors back here would be a benefit for condors, but that it would be a benefit for the region as well, and kind of restoring this ecological integrity. Now, that said, our partnership approach resulted in a couple of interesting things that I think really highlights some of the goals of not only biodiversity protection and restoration, but bringing tribes into partnership in this. We share a lot of the same lands, and a lot of our lands, and we're very tied to our homelands and can bring a lot to the table when it comes to these things, like these sort of culturally driven initiatives. But one really interesting point was that the Yurok tribe was able to serve as co-leads in the environmental assessment process under the National Environmental Protection Act, which is extremely rare, because 99% of the time the federal government will consult with tribes on major actions. They'll ask us what we think, but then are in no way beholden to actually, do anything based on what we tell them. As co-leads, we actually served as shared partners in the decision-making as to whether condor should come home with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and National Park Service, which is a paradigm that I would very much like to see repeated more often. The partnership approach also allowed the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, as kind of a concomitant process, to develop this release area as a non-essential experimental population under Section 10J of the ESA, the Endangered Species Act. And so that's important because, while of course every single one of our condors is supremely essential, we love them, what it means is that if the population were to wink out, if the worst were to happen, the rest of the population would continue to sustain itself. But more importantly, something like a 10J allows you to custom craft the conservation measures that fully support your species of concern, while loosening those barriers to their reintegration into the region by loosening some of the restrictions that go along with the ESA. And so that proved to be a very effective way to kind of enfold them back into our community. And ultimately, it was a real interesting process trying to integrate federal and tribal and state law all together, but with the support of our partners, we were really able to navigate that complexity. Ultimately, we got, after a 6-year environmental assessment process, a finding of no significant impact, which we received in March of 2021. And that kind of like broke us free to actually start implementation, and we were able to break ground within Redwood National Park lands, where they overlap with Yurok ancestral territory, to build our release and management facility. And so this facility is actually used to bring young condors in. They're coming from the breeding and rearing facilities, particularly the Oregon Zoo and the Peregrine Fund's Boise World Center of Birds of Prey. And it's where we bring birds in. It's where we make sure that they're healthy and behaving well before we release them. We continue to maintain the site for long-term management, and can bring birds back in for health checks and the like. So this was our main facility. This was in 2021, so that was right in the middle of all the steel and wood shortages, so we came in at twice the budget, but we still managed to push through, and a year later, we're prepared to receive our first condor, Pitoquin, who actually came to us from the Boise World Center of Birds of Prey as a mentor bird, unreleasable, but with a lot to teach our young birds that would be coming in about what it meant to be a condor. That was on March 25th of 2022, and on March 28th, we received our first cohort of young birds. This is A0, our first female. She was about 2.5 years when she came to join us. Picture on the right. Picture on the left is more recent. She's closer to 4. They reach full maturity at about 8 years old, so I kind of think she's in her awkward teenage stage right now. But we also, her name is Negem Nichwin Ka, which means she carries our prayers, one of the traditional roles of condors in our area. We also got A1, Shahalet. We finally fly, so representation that the birds have finally returned after 130 years. Same with A2 or Nesquachok, he returns. And then we have A3, who is named Poitousan, the one who goes out ahead or represents leadership, which is really what this first cohort, re-entering our environment without any other condors to guide the way. They really are providing leadership. Their arrival was incredible. We had a huge mix of partners there with Ventana Wildlife Society. That's Joe Burnett there from BWS, Pinnacles National Park, Oakland Zoo, Sequoia Park Zoo, Redwood National Parks, the state parks as well. And our VIPs, actually a cohort of our original Tribal Park Task Force, who had waited so long to see this to come to fruition. And it was just incredible to have them there. I'm going to show a very short video of the actual release. Hopefully this works well. So this is actually A3 poking his head out. He was so named Poitousan, the one who goes out ahead, because he was the first bird to be released. Quickly followed by A2 Nesquachok. I laugh over Poitousan's name because he just took off on walkabout for 2 weeks and we had to worry about him. He was just fine. Whereas Nesquachok lived up to his name of he returns by coming back every night and feeding on the carcasses and bathing in the pools we provide them in this kind of safe space. That's the release and management area. We soon received, and I'm just about wrapped up here, I'm sorry for my delay again. We received 3 months later our second cohort of birds, which were fully released by November. Again, 1 female and 3 males. And they regularly visit the site still. We continue to leave food out for them. We continue to make sure they have fresh water, that it's entirely fenced to be protected from predators so that they have a home base that they can come back to and receive what they need while they continue to expand across the landscape. And we, of course, continue to use this as a capture and management tool to make sure that they're healthy and well as well. We had our share of troubles this first year. As with much of California, we experienced one of the worst winters in decades. The condors weren't phased, but we had a heck of a time getting out there to take care of them. And the current struggle that we're facing is with highly pathogenic avian influenza, which unfortunately we have found condors to be able to contract, as evidenced by the very tragic experience in the southwestern flock managed by the Peregrine Fund, which lost 21 birds, 17 confirmed from avian influenza. It hasn't been seen in California, but we are working on a weekly basis to develop kind of the plans of how we move forward should it hit our population, develop the infrastructure, develop the partnerships so that we're ready if and when it should hit us. So at this point, we have reached kind of that end goal, but jumping off point at the same time of having condors reintroduced to our ancestral territory and filling kind of that central ecological role that they serve as an apex species, but also filling that cultural wound that has been extant for over 130 years at this point. And I like to end with this slide. It's just a super cool one. Condors were actually one of the most extremely endangered birds out there, with just 22 individuals flying free at one point in the world. And there are actually 22 individuals in this picture. And I just want to really highlight the decades of work that have gone into condor recovery and how much we've benefited from that, and just really highlight what we can really do when we put our minds to conservation and biodiversity restoration. So thank you very much.
Amazing story, Tiana. And we've got both dancing and goosebumps now in the webinar chat. So causing people to really be affected by and moved by the stories that we're hearing today. Thank you so much. Just looking at the time and knowing we've got 2 more stories to get through, I want to invite Devin to play Mark Henley's video next with California Wildfowl, and then we'll invite Mark to the screen.
Hi there, I'm Mark Henley with California Waterfowl. We're a hunter-based conservation group that restores and enhances wetlands and other waterfowl habitat. We today are out at a property of ours in the Butte Sink, and behind me you can see we have a dry wetland. It's got a great crop of smartweed and other waterfowl food plants. This will be flooded up in the next several weeks in anticipation of waterfowl season, and it will not just provide great habitat for waterfowl, but a whole host of other wetland dependent species. Frankly, it's these kind of projects that make me excited to work for California Waterfowl. This property cannot be developed or converted to other uses, And it's also open to the public for wildlife-dependent recreation, including waterfowl hunting. So both wildlife and people benefit from this type of work. Speaking of hunting, I just wanted to briefly talk about its role in conservation. As many of you may know, we have lost over 90% of our wetlands in California. But what few people realize is that of those that remain, about 2/3 are operated as private duck clubs. If hunting were to ever go away, we would lose a lot of that great habitat. Hunting also provides a great source of revenue for conservation and the Department of Fish and Wildlife. Every hunter must purchase a license and also associated stamps and tags. In the case of waterfowl hunting, a state and federal duck stamp. All that money goes back for conservation, and the Department of Fish and Wildlife receives about $32 million annually from hunting license related sales. There's also an 11% excise tax that's placed on the purchase of all firearms and ammunition through the Federal Pittman-Robertson Act. That funding is collected by the federal government and then redistributed to the states. California receives an additional $30 million from that source, and a lot of that is used to support the operations of our state wildlife areas. As many of you may know, hunting is highly regulated and is guided by science. This has helped to ensure that we're not over harvesting these species and that we have abundant game populations. And then lastly, on a personal note, I get asked a lot, you know, Mark, why do you hunt? Why is it important to you? And my response is frankly, some of the best memories that I have in my life are being out in the marsh with my kids and my dog and enjoying the outdoors with them. We do take a few animals here and there, but at the end of the day too, we get to bring home that meat, serve it up to our family and friends, and enjoy that. And to me, it's not just about recreation. It really is a way of life that we have here in California, and we definitely want to continue to support that. So thank you.
Awesome. And here we are. Mark, you want to just take it away?
Yeah, that was great. Appreciate you guys having me here. And yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the role of hunting and conservation and how it contributes to the 30 by 30 goals. So let me see if I can get my presentation up here. Let's see. And right there. Great. And I know some people, you know, kind of assume that hunting is detrimental to wildlife, but you know, I'm here to show you that that's actually not the case. It's, as I mentioned in the video, highly regulated, and it supports much of the habitat conservation efforts that are currently going on in California. And as all of you, I'm sure know, you know, available habitat is one of the most important factors in conserving wildlife populations. But by the way, I did want to mention too, on the condor issue and ammunition, it is now state law that all hunters must use non-lead projectiles when hunting. So that will help to protect the condor as well as a host of other non-game species. My presentation today it's pretty old school with a lot of verbiage and facts. So hey, no falling asleep. There'll be a quiz on this after, right? And by the way, on the front here, the start of my video or my presentation, that's a picture of my daughter, Hannah, which again is one of the main reasons I hunt. It's just a great way to spend quality time in the outdoors and had a lot of great memories with her and my other kids out in the field. So in terms of, you know, how does hunting really benefit conservation? Much of it comes from the revenue sources that it generates. And a lot of that is from hunting license and related stamp and tag sales. If you're going to go out and hunt, I mean, first you have to take your hunter safety course, but then you're also, once you're, you know, get that certificate, you go out and buy your license. That's going to be about $50. And then you're going to have to buy various stamps and tags to hunt various species, which probably will add up to another 50 to $100. And all of that is then used back to benefit those species. The great thing is that many of the habitat projects that are generated from those monies, they don't just benefit, quail or waterfowl or deer, but a whole host of other species, benefit from it. So even though they're directed at certain species, there's all sorts of side benefits for other wildlife species throughout California. And, that hunting license related revenue that generates about $31 million annually. So it's definitely, a significant amount of money. It is, fortunately, the licenses are adjusted for inflation every year. And so they keep pace with what's going on with the economy, and we get good purchasing power out of them year after year. And that's all in the Fish and Game Code and set up in state law. The other major source of funding, which is it's a federal source of funding for conservation, is through the Federal Pittman-Robertson Act. And this is an act that was passed back in 1937. It's probably our most successful conservation program in the entire United States history. What it does is it places a 10 to 11% excise tax on the purchase of sporting arms and ammunition, as well as handguns and archery equipment. And since it started back in 1937, it's generated over $25 billion for a whole host of conservation projects throughout the states, including a lot of public access projects. So it definitely helps people that are trying to get into the outdoors and enjoy that experience. California itself receives about $35 million annually, and much of that money is then used to maintain and operate our state wildlife areas, which frankly have some of the best habitat on our public lands in California. So it's a real critical source of revenue for the Department of Fish and Wildlife to manage its properties. In terms of hunting and wetlands conservation, I mean, they are so intertwined in California. You really can't have one without the other. It's hunting, we have found, is the prime motivation for landowners in California to conserve wetlands in particular, as well as other wildlife habitat. The lease revenue that is made from hunting also helps to keep land as open space or wildlife friendly agriculture. A lot of these other landowners, they're running their operations, and that extra money that they get from leasing out from hunting allows them to then continue that year in and year out, rather than being pressured to sell out to developers or convert the land to other uses. So it's very important. Another great thing is many of the duck clubs in the Central Valley in particular have state or federal conservation easements or other habitat conservation programs that they participate in. And of course, the easements help to protect that land in perpetuity. That also can never be then converted to other uses. And then on the waterfowl side, every duck hunter has to purchase a federal duck stamp. And that's been a requirement for many decades now. And that has actually now helped to acquire over 6 million acres of wetlands and other waterfowl habitat within the National Wildlife Refuge System. And so there's many refuges throughout California that benefited from that. And we enjoy these robust public lands because those dollars that have continued to come to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and they've been able to really expand the boundaries of their refuges with those monies. Science, of course, has to be the main driver in all this. Hunting, falls under the North American model of wildlife conservation. And, one of its 7, tenets is basically that science has to drive all management decisions. Most game species populations are surveyed each year, and we have professional biologists then that work for the state and federal governments that use that data to recommend appropriate hunting seasons and bag limits. And in some years, we have closed seasons on these things. I mean, if the counts just aren't there, they will shut down the season. The hunters understand that. Can't always have a season, but for the most part, these game populations are actually doing really well and thriving. So fortunately, we have very few closures. Waterfowl too, they're annually monitored through surveys that have been going back since 1955. There's breeding population and pond survey transects that pilots fly across Canada, Alaska, and the prairie pothole region of the United States. And hunters also help to contribute to the information gathering. They will check in their birds at check stations and also send the wings of their harvested birds into the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and that provides really good data. And then, as I kind of implied, because of all this focus on science and providing appropriate habitat, most game species populations are doing really well. And in some cases, they're overabundant and have actually become almost a pest, particularly for farmers. So sometimes we've been a little bit too successful with our efforts to conserve habitat for these species. So getting to how this relates to 30 by 30 and helping to fulfill those goals. The state and federal lands that have been purchased with hunter-generated monies, or they're maintained with those monies, those are all protected in perpetuity, and it's at least 1 million acres. I think I'm way underestimating there. But these are throughout California, and they can never be converted to other uses. That all counts towards, that 30 by 30 goal. And the good thing is these public lands are not only open for public hunting, but a whole host of other wildlife dependent recreation, such as wildlife viewing, conservation education. We get a lot of school kids that come out and enjoy these properties, and things like fishing. So it's really important to get the public out to see these areas and enjoy them. And then, of course, many of the hunted properties, particularly duck clubs, are under permanent state or federal conservation easements. And that runs into the tens of thousands of acres, and that certainly counts towards the goal as well. And I'll just mention lastly, hunting groups like ours, Ducks Unlimited, California Deer Association, Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, we also are all landowners ourselves, and we have purchased properties throughout the state, which of course we're managing for wildlife, but those also will never be developed. Those will always be protected and kept as good wildlife habitat and open space. So with that, I'll stop. I know time is limited, and thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Really appreciate the presentation, the conversation, the information. We do have one more. I did put into the chat that if folks can stay on, that would be wonderful, just to continue to honor the different perspectives and information and efforts that are out there. And Michelle's work is really inspiring. If you need to go, thank you so much for being here. And please do jump back online and see the full recording and Michelle's work if you have to go. Jen, did you want to say something before we jump forward?
I just wanted to thank Mark for coming. I recognize that hunting is a somewhat controversial topic, but Mark has been an incredible partner in 30 by 30. And I think we need to recognize that there's a broad array of ways that we get conservation done in California. And so I just want to give him a special thanks and not take more time from Michelle, who I can't wait to hear from. And I know we're over time, but I'm staying. So thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Devin, let's go ahead and play Michelle's video.
Pepperwood is a place of connection. It's a place where people and nature come together, invoking a sense of curiosity and wonder and exploration. It's a place where experts and big ideas come together with land applications. It's a place of inspiration and hope with its sweeping vistas, with its renewal of life after the fire. It's a place where people come to explore themselves and their connection to the land. So as humans, we have short memories. We had this fire come through, and there was a fire before that 60 years prior.
But we already forgot the impacts of that, the influence of that on the people and the land. But there's a history here. There's a rich cultural heritage. There's a knowledge base we can draw upon. There's a knowledge base we can cultivate in the next generation. And so by bringing children and people here to connect with the land, to learn about it, to explore it, to find that sense of wonder, it culminates in conservation of these services that our ecosystem provides so that we all can have quality of life for future generations.
Really amazing story, Michelle. I'm going to go ahead and just turn it over to you and hear a little bit more about your work and what's happening up at Pepperwood.
I did the classic mute. I wanted to thank everyone for sticking around if you are, and for your time today. I'm really excited to be here and represent Pepperwood, going into more detail about our role as a research field station, which we like to call a climate ecosystem sentinel site, which basically means we're really out there just watching, listening, and learning from the landscapes that we can best steward this place we call home. But before I get started, I'd like to acknowledge that Pepperwood sits within the traditional homeland of the Wapo people. We respect and honor past, present, and future generations of Wapo and their continued connection to this land. We are grateful for the opportunity to learn about this beautiful place and to give our respect for its first inhabitants. So Pepperwood is located in eastern Sonoma County in the North Bay region, indicated by the red dot on the map there. And we are located in the innermost coastal mountain ranges. And what this means is we have a lot of different species that converge here, from coastal habitats inland. We have species in their southernmost and northernmost boundaries, all converging and living together in this complex topography, really lending itself as a hotspot for biodiversity and a great research location. And as a sentinel site, what this means is we're really just out there, like I said, watching, learning, listening. And that's either us personally out there as humans in the field, or with our technology that we have on site. And we have four main categories that I'm going to touch upon briefly. We have alert systems, abiotic monitoring, vegetation monitoring, and wildlife monitoring. Not just wildlife at Pepperwood, but also throughout our region. And so as far as alert systems go, we work with lots of different partners to host new technology, emerging technology, and alert systems such as this early flood detection network rain gauge. We were the first location in Sonoma County to get an alert wildfire camera, which now there are dozens in our region. In fact, this is an image from the Kincaid fire going through Pepperwood from one of the cameras. And we also recently had a seismograph installed to look at earthquakes in our region. As far as abiotic monitoring, we're out there collecting data on air temperature, humidity, stream flows. We are doing fog monitoring, looking at frequency and duration of fog. We have all kinds of meteorological stations, many of which are sending real-time data to the cloud for the public to access. And a lot of these are associated with David Ackerley at UC Berkeley and his work. And then we're monitoring our soil health. And here there's a research scientist who's looking at hydrophobicity in our soils following wildfire. We have a great team of ecologists and biologists working to study our vegetation communities, whether we're in our grasslands or our forests. And at Pepperwood, we are actively stewarding our land. And what I mean by that is we are out there doing conservation grazing with cattle in our rangelands. We're out there selectively thinning and managing fuels in our forests, conducting prescription burns, managing invasive weeds. And so all of our monitoring is not just to look at these ecosystems under the pressures of climate change or natural disturbances like wildfire or drought, but also our imposed disturbances with the grazing and the burning. Are we getting the impacts and the effects that we desire? Are we supporting biodiversity? And of course, the wildlife is one of the funnest parts of my job, whether it's looking under cover boards or through the lens of a camera to watch these animals as they either inhabit this space or move through. And with our monitoring, I'm an advocate of monitoring through it. As much as we can get monitoring on the ground, it's so important. But Pepperwood, thankfully, had a lot of our monitoring in place prior to a wildfire in 2017 that burned 95% of our preserve. And then 2 years later, we burnt, more than half burnt again in 2019. And with all that monitoring on the ground, we now have a really unique opportunity to look at before wildfire and after wildfire effects and how our ecosystem is recovering in this managed system. And, as an ecologist, before the wildfires, I would point at burn scars in trees. I would talk about the critical role that fire has in the California ecosystem. And yet I had never experienced one. But going through that process, it was quite inspiring to see this blackened landscape come alive, such as this native perennial bunch grass you see here. This is purple needlegrass. These perennial plants can live over 100 years with roots that go deep down into the earth and provide some of the first nutrition to browsers and foragers after a wildfire. Or places like this, to my inexperienced eye, that looked quite devastating, just within a matter of a couple of years, coming back with vigor. Our Mediterranean species are adapted to fire. Or the seed banks that wake up. We often see California poppy and cream cups like this in this meadow, but not to this degree. It was absolutely inspiring to be out there. And it was very healing, both personally and professionally, to witness this. And also, it makes me think about not just spatial biodiversity across space in California, but also through time, how diversity changes, how much gene flow is occurring right now after fire, and the challenge of incorporating temporal conservation. We don't really fully understand the landscape until we see it after fire. And of course, with wildfire comes our heavy tools that are required to stop fire and are very necessary to help conserve and save communities, families, homes. But with this comes a challenge of stewarding these tools, stewarding these impacts on the land. And one thing that was very inspiring at Pepperwood was that the amount of community that came out to support us in this endeavor. It is taking all of us out there to help prevent erosion, to bring back the topsoil so that these lands can heal after this instance. Or plant 20,000 native perennial plant grasses, plant plugs in these scars. And it just brings the community together, it brings a sense of joy, it brings a real sense of recovery and participation in this effort. And then where Pepperwood is really heading now is we're trying to get more, getting more good fire on the land. And this would not be possible without the help of 4 critical people. In the top left corner here is Clint McKay. He is our chair of our Native Advisory Council. He is also our Indigenous Education Specialist and is helping advise us with our land stewardship and also getting cultural burning on the ground. Next to him is Devin Friedfeld. He's our Assistant Preserve Manager, and he is now a certified burn boss. And so we can get our burns going more frequently. We can try to get good fire on the ground the way we like it. And that's due to all the hard work of Sasha Brolman here, who is running the Fire Forward program at Audubon Canyon Ranch and is helping to train local landowners, practitioners, and getting them on the ground with the Good Fire Alliance so we can get this work done. And then next to her is Michael Gologly, our preserve manager, who's behind the scenes, making sure all these players are at the table, which can be very complex. But as we conduct more and more burns and get more fire on the ground, we're bringing people together so they can gain that experience and take those skills out into their backyards. Because this land absolutely requires us. It requires us as stewards, as watchers, as fire bringers. And we're really turning our data into action because our actions up here in the mountains, they absolutely connect to the tide pools that Allison is busy monitoring. We're all connected, and it requires our human presence and our human caretaking to support and sustain the biodiversity here that we enjoy and that we hope that the next generations are able to enjoy as well. So with that, I would like to thank you for your time.
Unbelievable. Thanks so much, Michelle. And I love Darlene's comment in the chat. I don't know if you saw it. Your presentation has a poetic quality, and all of you brought such amazing poetry and storytelling to us on top of the amazing biodiversity conservation work that you're doing. So thank you all. I want to get out of the way and give Jen the opportunity to share a few closing remarks and updates on some future activities, and just a final note of gratitude for all of our presenters.
Yeah, and we're over time, and I think that's just a reflection of the biodiversity or the diversity of viewpoints that we have within 30 by 30. We could have done 100 presenters, honestly, and we always overreach because we can never decide who to cut, because we can't, because there's just so many great stories and great folks. So thank you all for being here. I know we're over time. I just have a couple quick slides to share with you. This was one of over 100 biodiversity events going on this week. We really hope that you check out the Biodiversity Day website and find something cool to do. Get out and play with iNaturalist. Next slide, we have a challenge where we want you to go find 30 species using iNaturalist and tag them for 30 by 30. That's just inspirational way for all of us to connect. And most importantly, so many more stories will be on display when you come with us to Riverside. We have 2 days of just celebration, connection, and creation together to really advance our work on protecting 30% of our lands and coastal waters by 2030. We're on the move. This is going to be a great event. Please register, please come. I promise you will not be disappointed. And again, thank you all for staying so long, and appreciate you all being here. And thanks to all our great speakers. I'm really, truly inspired and thrilled. So thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thanks all. Goodbye. Have a great week.